is that I think that you've seen the renewed trust that we have. We've also seen the advanced work in the TTC on supply chain disruptions, on semiconductors, rare earths. Myron mentioned that, and solar supply chains. I think we recognize the challenge, and I do think in future meetings and in future months you will see very specific projects going forward. Look, when we look at the original task of the TTC, that puts forth a compelling vision for global trade and technology. For free trade is part of it, but it is worker-centered trade in a way that serves our people, protects our interests, and promotes democratic values and our innovation. It's 8 months later since Pittsburgh. It's clear that we stand together and that we defend shared values that have been accepted for 75 years and are now at risk because of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. The close cooperation that you've seen between the U.S. and the EU on things like disinformation, on export controls, frankly would have taken a much longer time to happen without the TTC. So you're already seeing results. And our focus on supply chains today brings us into sharp focus. We have a problem. We recognize we have a problem both in semiconductors and in critical minerals. We need to find a solution. Our work here can help to unlock economic opportunities. This is both a business opportunity, an opportunity for our businesses, but it's also a strategic imperative, and the TTC is very much aware of that. So I think you will see on supply chains continued engagement, real progress, and we will look forward to coming back here and engaging with TTC stakeholders on both sides. And the proof will be in the pudding, as we say. You will need to see results, and we intend to provide results because we know we have to move forward. Thank you.
Maybe a few words from Vice President Dombrovskis, and then we will go on to the second topic.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you to panelists and the audience for your comments and suggestions. Events in the recent months confirm that enhanced transatlantic cooperation is essential for us to be able to confront evolving global context and to withstand risks. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has highlighted dramatically the relevance of our joint commitment to address trade and security risks associated with export of sensitive technologies to destinations of concern, notably Russia. The TTC has played an important role in coordination of the unprecedented set of sanctions against Russia, in particular in area of export controls. Looking forward, our intention is also to continue that level of engagement to discuss how to mitigate the negative impacts of this aggression on the global economy and on Ukrainian economy in particular. Well, the transatlantic marketplace is large and deep. Our economic prosperity was built on global openness, and well-functioning transatlantic trade is key for resilient supply chains. So our shared work to promote resilience and security of supply chains and our cooperation to mitigate vulnerabilities should not give the sense that we are withdrawing from the globalization. On the contrary, we continue engaging in partnership with spirit of openness, seeking ways to cooperate, whereby we protect our economic interests in a way that is not putting additional pressure on world economy, and also by upholding and reforming a global rules-based trading system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to the second topic. So the second topic, how can the TTC facilitate the green and digital transitions? An important topic. I'll give the floor to Secretary Raimondo for introductory comments. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to our hosts. I think I can confidently state that Paris is a fantastic place to have any event, and you've done a wonderful job hosting the second TTC. Before I talk about the green and digital transition, I do want to comment on something that has struck me as I've listened to our stakeholders, which is that, and it should give all of you stakeholders some assurance, every issue that came up from the stakeholders, whether it is standards, achievement of equity as it relates to, as we move towards digital world, coordination on export controls, focusing on the food crisis, all the semiconductors, coordination of our plans on semiconductors, every issue brought up by stakeholders was on our agenda this morning and yesterday for TTC. And I know that was validating for me, because if we're working on the things that are important to the stakeholders, then we're doing it right. And I hope you have some comfort to know that the issues top of mind for the stakeholders are the issues on which we are most focused. So I wanted to make that point. This issue of facilitating the green and digital transition is, of course, an extremely important one. Inequality was brought up in the prior panel. We, certainly in the U.S., are struggling with income inequality and equality of opportunity. And if we don't do it right, the digital transition and the green transition will make that inequality even worse. And so we have to be cognizant of that reality and make sure that as we move, as we have to, speedily, especially as it relates to the green transition, we are putting in place the supports and the policies that we need to ensure greater equality. Because left to our own devices, we run the risk of increasing inequality. An area that I am particularly focused on as Commerce Secretary relates to broadband. And on last Friday, I announced an initiative led by President Biden to make a $65 billion investment in the United States to ensure that every single American has access to high-speed, high-quality, affordable internet. Unfortunately, tens of millions of Americans and millions of Europeans don't now have that. And the reality is that lack of broadband, and this is one example, and there are many, lack of broadband in a digital world will massively exacerbate inequality. So if we're going to bring about our digital transition and reduce inequality and close the digital divide, then we have to support people. And a simple example of that is making sure every SME, every individual business owner, every person, every student, every farmer has affordable internet. And so that's an initiative that we are bringing about. I know similar initiatives are taking place here in the EU, and I think it's necessary for true digital equity. Much of the work that we're doing at the TTC underpins these goals of green and digital transition and doing it in a way which brings about equity and sustainability. I just want to highlight the work of two of our working groups. By the way, this gives me an opportunity to say thank you to the working groups, the working group heads, many of whom are here. We, of course, are on the stage touting your great work, which happens, starting tomorrow. The working groups begin with all the do-outs from today. So thank you for your hard work. One example, we have a working group called Global Trade Challenges Working Group. They're seeking to shape the positive opportunities and mitigate the negative impacts of digital trade on EU and US workforces, including, for example, and this was brought up before, areas of worker protections and the status of workers in the digital economy. So vitally important. Another working group is called the Climate and Clean Tech Working Group, which in conjunction with Trade Challenges Working Group is undertaking an effort to intensify EU-US cooperation in the area of public procurement of environmental goods and technologies. Two absolutely vital areas. They've made huge progress already, and we look forward to our next TTC, which will happen in early winter or late autumn, where they will come to us with policy recommendations on these topics. A final word, and this is just cannot be said enough. Everything that we're talking about here relates importantly to SMEs. And we discussed this morning, the biggest companies in general have the resources and wherewithal to figure things out, figure out how to work within new standards, figure out how to work globally, figure out how to train. It's the smaller companies that we have to ensure aren't left out of opportunities, whether that is procurement, whether that is skills, whether that is technology, talent, and resources. So we all are especially committed in the stakeholder engagement to hearing from the voices of smaller entities and actually workers individually, because at the end of the day, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing here. So we're excited to hear from our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Exit. Vice President Dombrovskis, the floor is yours.
First of all, a successful green transition and fight against climate change is important policy priority on both sides of the Atlantic. So I therefore would like to use this opportunity to highlight the TTC's contribution to our broader sustainability agenda. Because ensuring a just transition towards resilient and green economy is an important theme in all TTC working groups. So already in Pittsburgh, we equipped TTC with a strong social sustainability dimension, and in Paris we are further strengthening. Most notably, at today's meeting, we agreed to coordinate in international fora on promotion of responsible business practices, and we have set up a trade and labor dialogue, tripartite trade and labor dialogue, including social partners, which obviously will then give social partners a strong voice in transatlantic relations, because we want to ensure that green and digital transitions are just. We also agreed to mitigate the impact of digital trade on the EU and US workforces, and more immediately to address social and economic implications of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Now let me move to another just as significant side of the work on sustainable trade. Also there we are making important advancements, so I'm pleased that now we have agreed on environment and climate agenda in our working group 10 on global trade challenges, so we now have a concrete work plan. Because that's indeed an area where we could take clear actions to facilitate green transition and address environmental challenges through trade facilitation. Internationally, we agreed to cooperate on the WTO statement on trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions. And we should also find ways to better enable circular approaches, including trade facilitation in relation to remanufacturing, refurbishing, repair, and direct reuse. We also agreed to exchange information on implementation of environment-related provisions on our respective trade agreements and our respective rules and initiatives in relation to sustainable fisheries management and combating illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Well, this green work plan will complement additional work which is going on other working groups. Secretary Raimondo already mentioned green public procurement, which are advancing in climate and clean tech working group. The work is ongoing on carbon footprinting methodologies and on electromobility. On electromobility, I would particularly emphasize, since it's now rapidly being rolled out on both sides of the Atlantic, if we manage to agree to compatible charging standards and correspondingly charging infrastructure, that would be a major boost for this rollout. And we're working also on supply chain resilience related to the green transition, including clean energy and critical materials. So overall, the objective is to accelerate the deployment of green goods and technologies in transatlantic marketplace, but also, of course, work. Advancement under the TTC trade and climate agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now statements from panelists, some online and Franke Helmskerk here. Can you please try to stick to max 2 minutes so we can do the press conference afterwards? I think journalists are hungry as well, so we don't want to keep any hungry journalists. So the floor is yours. Frank Helmskerk, Secretary General of the European Roundtable for Industry.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bit lonely in the panel here. For those of you who are in the panel online, you are really missing out on something. Also, the gender balance on stage is also hasn't changed in the second panel either. But if you come by bike and by train, you do pretty good on your sustainability footprint, like I did this morning. The European Roundtable for Industry is quite happy with the TTC. Together with my counterpart, Josh Bolton, from the Business Roundtable, we will also publicly launch a supportive statement. Of course, we can always do better. Like Maren, like Marcus, we would like to ask for a bit more structured, less last-minute dialogue, because I'm convinced we can share practical cross-sectorial insights. But let's also count our blessings. It's very important and good to have this transatlantic dialogue. This US administration is fortunately taking a much different approach than the previous one. I don't know whether I say this also on behalf of the US Business Roundtable, but at least it's my view. On green and digital, a few comments. Let's, as transatlantic coalition, also jointly set global rules and standards. Let's continue to build on and modernize the WTO. Let's seek a new multilateral agreement on environmental goods. And let's make sure that we align the environmental standards incorporated in our free trade agreements. And in order to address the risks of carbon leakage, let's work together on level playing field mechanisms and aim to bring carbon prices closer together in both our markets and globally. Then some of our message on digital. Also there, let's cooperate on new areas of regulation, especially for emerging technologies such as AI and 6G, based on our shared values. Minimize fragmentation is key. Enhance the cooperation in cybersecurity. Also there, we recently had a call with our corporate global heads of cyber. They were worried because it was so quiet on cyber. Maybe it's also a bit of their profession to always be worried. But what I took away was that the quality of their dialogue of the European multinationals with the American intelligence environment was more productive than the European. So let's also there deal with the European fragmented approach on cyber intelligence. And even if it's not part of TTC, like Maren, it's key to finalize the transatlantic data privacy framework to replace the privacy shields. And my final comment is on sanctions and export controls. Also here, the trust and cooperation within the TTC has paid off. As ERT, we are fully supportive on sanctions. But let's, however, also make clear that interpretation and information on sanctions is clear and consistent across sectors and countries. And when designing these sanctions, they should hurt the Putin clan much more than they hurt us. But I'm also sure that here the transatlantic dialogue leads to better mutual understanding and collective actions. So congratulations on the work done. on the agenda ahead. I think 80% of the work has been done and 80% still to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Alessia Virone from the Clean Air Task Force. We can't.
I understand.
Yeah, perfect.
You can hear me?
Now, yes, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thanking you for the invitation to this event and saying that I was going to keep it short, as I understand the audience is starting to be hungry. So Clean Air Task Force is an NGO working on both sides of the Atlantic. So we very much welcome the opportunity to discuss EU-US trade and climate relations. Historically, the transatlantic cooperation has been a driving force to move climate discussion and diplomacy around the world. So we really see a lot of opportunity for climate and clean tech cooperation across the two sides of the Atlantic. At the moment, we are facing several crises, but the most recent one should not make us forget the ongoing climate crisis that still remain very much an urgent priority. Both the EU and the US are aiming toward climate neutrality in the upcoming decades. And so we're going to face several challenges, and we have the ability to learn from each other to support the decarbonization process. As a first step, we're very happy to see the development of the Climate and Green Tech Working Group, and we see several topics that would need to be addressed in this working group to make sure that trade and climate between the two sides of the Atlantic are closely as possible, closely aligned across the two sides of the Atlantic. The first point is going to concern regulation. At the moment, both the US and the EU have the same goal, but they don't always have the same approach. And so a dialogue and discussion on several key points is going to be very useful. And among the topics to discuss, we see issues such as carbon pricing and carbon leakage that have already been mentioned, but also discussing methodology for greenhouse gas emission assessment in key trade projects. Similarly, issues as climate dumping would be worth a discussion between the two sides of the Atlantic. So that's on the part on regulation. Another point that would need discussion is related to innovation. We need to remember that a large part of the technology that will be needed for decarbonization are not yet developed to scale and are not always ready for market. So we need to discuss how we can support each other in the development of this technology within innovation and research and make sure that we align where possible. The TTC should support the EU and the US in reaching joint leadership for this green and clean technology that will be needed in the future, and should also discuss how this technology can be traded and developed within the transatlantic country, but also with third countries and partners. So first point, regulation, second point, innovation, and the third point that I want to make is related to international coordination. By aligning the position bilaterally before presenting and promoting them on the international stage, the EU and the US can prove extremely convincing. And I think that we saw again recently with the Global Methane Pledge, for example, that when they work together, the EU and the US really have a lot of weight internationally to move the global agenda on climate and sustainability. So now is really the perfect time to review the agenda and build a productive bilateral partnership and policy collaboration in the area of trade, clean tech, and climate change. And I'm very much looking forward to following these developments. Thank you.
Many thanks. Many thanks. I'll ask Katy Feingold from the AFL-CIO, and please be very short, all of you. We're running out of time, so we might have to cut some of the interventions if they're not shorter now. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, and thank you for inviting the US and the EU unions. Let me start with a few ideas on digitalization and then turn to the green transition. In the absence of government regulation, technology companies collect data from workers and consumers, which is then analyzed, packaged, and sold to third parties without knowledge or consent. We believe there needs to be a rights-based collective approach to data and data privacy, and that should be part of the TTC agenda. Companies often use invasive surveillance technologies and AI algorithms to monitor workers and increase work speed, leading to stressed out employees, increased injuries, and high rates of worker turnover. To address these challenges, we need a transatlantic digital commitment to enforcing workers' rights through the inclusive and ongoing governance of digital technologies within and across national boundaries. This should include mandatory human and worker rights assessments. These are key to any governance model, which has to be ongoing. Certification would just be a snapshot in time. You need ongoing monitoring. The TTC is an ideal forum for these discussions. On the green transition and the just transition, it's vital that both governments' policies and investments create resilient supply chains for green energy goods that end our dependence on products made with forced labor and dirty energy. We must also develop joint skills programs across the Atlantic. In the U.S., just a few weeks ago, history was made when North America's building trades unions and Ørsted U.S., the U.S. leader in offshore wind energy, announced a project labor agreement to construct the company's U.S. offshore wind farms with an American union workforce. This agreement was made possible with transatlantic partnerships between unions and pension funds in the U.S. and Denmark. It sets a model for how we should be working together, and it sets a bar for working conditions and equity, creates apprenticeship programs and career opportunities for communities most impacted by environmental injustice. This is a great model that should be duplicated to ensure we build a clean energy transition with union jobs that also extend into manufacturing. We look forward to working with the TTC to strengthening the transatlantic conversation with our union counterparts as well as business and government. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now Brian Scarpelli from ACT, the App Association.
Hello. Thank you. My name is Brian Scarpelli, Senior Global Policy Counsel with ACT, the App Association. We are an international not-for-profit trade association representing thousands of small business application developers and connected device companies located across the United States and the European Union, and we're honored to participate in today's EU-US Trade and Technology Council meeting as a panelist on this important topic, and congratulate both the EU and the US on their leadership and progress both before and since the Pittsburgh meeting across the TTC's working groups. We particularly appreciate Secretary Raimondo's comments on the value of small businesses and agree their inclusion in the TTC process is vital. The small business innovator community that the App Association represents believes that the green and digital transitions are crucial for both the EU and US economies and EU-US relations, and are an opportunity for global leadership. Small businesses and startups that we represent and will continue to be essential to a successful green and digital transition and the mitigation of disparities and inequities. The App Association also believes that the TTC must contribute to the twin transition by developing common objectives and methodologies to achieve it in the most relevant areas. The TTC can and should serve as a forum to ensure that this twin transition benefits citizens and businesses alike, particularly small businesses, by building a transatlantic environment to support innovation and investment by, among other steps, reducing trade tensions for the digital economy, namely, in our view, by ensuring transatlantic data flows through the newly announced transatlantic data privacy framework, as well as in areas such as export controls, supporting digital transformations that are critical to advancing access and equity, efficiencies and decarbonization goals, and enabling rapid scaling up of breakthrough technologies in areas like artificial intelligence and others by small businesses and startups between the EU and US. Small business and startup innovator community that we represent, the App Association, we're committed to the green and digital transition. We, again, appreciate the opportunity to participate here, and we look forward to working with the EU, the US, and all other stakeholders moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Patricia Heidegger from the European Environmental Bureau.
Thank you very much for inviting us to today's exchange. I represent the largest federation of environmental organizations in Europe. Digital technologies have advanced more rapidly than any other innovation in human history, and they must be anchored in fundamental rights and serve the protection of the environment and the climate. They need to be able to operate within the carrying capacity of the planet, but also the coping capacity of humans. So digitalization helps all sectors in the green transition to become more efficient, but at the same time, it also carries an enormous environmental and social justice impact of its own. Mining for and the manufacturing of devices and infrastructure they daily use, and massive data centers increasingly contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. Digital technology and electrification come with increasing demand for critical raw materials. The EU's projected lithium demand for 2050 is higher than what the whole world uses today. So this will inevitably lead to more mining conflicts globally, to more dependency on undemocratic regimes who are ready to exploit workers, to let go of environmental protections, or even use military force to secure raw materials. So what we need to do is to also prioritize solutions that need fewer resources. For instance, shared and public modes of transport instead of the continuous expansion of individual cars. So we expect the EU and the US in this forum to work together to adopt measures that reduce the overconsumption of digital and other high-impact technology to bring down energy and raw material demand. One way forward is that products must become more sustainable through smart product design, clear repairability and longevity standards, and extended producer responsibility, combined with a digital product passport with robust information. Let me give you just one illustration of the vast potential. We calculated that extending the lifetime of washing machines, notebooks, vacuum cleaners, and smartphones in the EU by only 1 year would result in CO2 savings equivalent to taking over 2 million cars off the road every year. So beyond better products, we need to adopt ambitious recycling rates and heavily upscale urban mining for the raw materials necessary for the green and digital transition. Next to emission targets that we've already adopted at the global scale, we need targets for the reduction of material use. And one last point, a small number of tech companies yield too much power. They flaunt environmental rules, they avoid fiscal environmental duties, including extended producer responsibility. So the EU and the US must cooperate to ensure tech companies face the same rules as other sectors. All these measures will help the transatlantic partners to lead on innovation and to become more sufficient and independent regarding raw materials. Together, we believe the EU and the US can and must drive the smart green digital transition globally that is oriented towards human and planetary well-being. Thank you.
We now have questions from the audience here and people as well online who woke up early this morning, US time. I'll give the floor to Edmund Mirswinski from the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue. Please, 2 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Thank you. The Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue is the oldest civil society dialogue advising the governments. We have got a comprehensive regulatory cooperation agenda we've already submitted, and we obviously care a great deal about the digital and green transition. I want to focus only on one aspect of our position, and that is the need to give consumers a comprehensive right to repair their own stuff and help us move toward a sustainable circular economy. Products with unnecessary restrictions on repair tools lead consumers to spend money replacing devices instead of repairing them. They harm our planet by contributing to our rapidly growing electronic waste program. Things are made worse by the big tech focus on adding many more things to the Internet of Things. Both the US and the EU have strong civil society right to repair movements led by consumers and small businesses. A lot, but it's not much that corporations have done to respond to demands for a right to repair has been in response to that civil society leadership. Much has already been done on both sides of the Atlantic, however. The Biden administration and the U.S. Federal Trade Commission have made right to repair an important part of their competition agenda. France has an important new law with repairability index. The U.S. has taken steps to improve a consumer's right to repair, but more needs to be done. Will the TTC deal with the problem that big tech would rather make more stuff that cannot be fixed at home and is designed to be bricked and thrown away after inadequate software updates? A sustainability agenda that stops the climate journey, the climate emergency means we must have better stuff that lasts longer and ends planned obsolescence. How else can the TTC help? Will the TTC do more to reach out to consumer and repair stakeholders who are already working with farmers to improve their right to repair their tractors, and medical technicians who want a right to technical information so they can fix their COVID ventilators? Will the governments do more to give EU and US consumers a comprehensive right to repair based on improving product design, consumer information, repair services, and guarantee rights? TACD.org looks forward to working with the two governments and other stakeholders going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. One of you, if you want to answer, maybe briefly.
This is really good because I think it's an add-on to some of the discussions that we have had. It may be me, but I don't think that we have been sufficiently precise on, for instance, our talks on raw materials. We're talking about access to raw materials, mining of raw materials, environmental in mining raw materials, but not sufficiently about the circularity and about the right to repair, the right for people actually to maintain their products, but to have them repaired. And I think these are excellent points because the demand for raw material will increase no matter what. So circularity must indeed be part of it. Also, what I was told the other day about the electrification of mines. So you have electrical vehicles that autonomous can work the mines, which will prevent, a lot of hazard for workers, and of course also limit the footprint of mining in itself. So I think there is a lot to be done. We've been talking a lot about standards, but we have not been discussing standards in shared transportation. The interoperability between different transport modes, how to enable people to go from one part of transport to another, and how for vehicles to be prepared for that. I think the last point here made, and the made by Patricia, is an add-on to what we have been discussing so far on both raw materials and circularity, because also the build-up of this part of industry where what was waste, what is now resources, is the core. I think that is also something that could be enabled in the transatlantic relationship. So I would like to thank you for this inspiration, and if there is agreement, we would more than happy to focus on that. And at least for me, this is, again, a very specific token of appreciation of stakeholder outreach, that we learn something every time we talk together. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Meg Gentle from Innovative Fuels USA. Can you jump straight to the question? Would be great. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you for including me today. I do want to say that I'm representing HIF, which stands for Highly Innovative Fuels. We are a global company producing e-fuels. E-fuels are renewable hydrocarbons that are made from green hydrogen and carbon dioxide captured from the atmosphere. They do not come out of the ground. They're considered a drop-in fuel because they're chemically identical to their fossil fuel counterparts, and therefore can be used in ships, cars, airplanes in use today without modifying existing infrastructure. They go hand in hand with electric vehicles to accelerate decarbonization and improve global energy security, because e-fuels can be produced in locations with renewable energy sources that have low political risk and safely deliver to demand centers in US and Europe, displacing traditional fossil fuels. We can enable investment in these renewable fuels by creating standards for carbon accounting and carbon markets. And so my question today is, how can we work together to create
or influence public policy that is the same in Europe and the United States on carbon accounting and carbon markets that allows connectivity with electricity grids to balance the intermittency of renewable energy and enable baseload production of green technologies like e-fuels at a lower cost.
Look, thank you for your question. We are looking and will continue to look on the energy front at a number of options, and this is obviously one of them. At the end of the day, what we are facing today just shows us that we need to redouble our efforts on renewable energy sources and cutting down on fossil fuels. And what you're proposing is one option to do that. So I think the lesson is all options are on the table. This is one, and thank you for bringing it up, and this is one issue that we will definitely continue to explore. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take the three last questions. Can you please come to the microphone? I'll have Cecilia Bonfeld-Dahl from Digital Europe, and then I'll take the three questions in a row, so if you want to come. And so we can, Elvire Fabry from l'Institut Jacques Delors, and Jason Oxman from ITI. If you want to come to the microphone, we'll take the three questions so we can wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this second invitation to the TTC. A big thank you especially to Vice President Vestager and Secretary Raimondo for really leading this work. I met you in the first days, and we really see that it's delivering. I think we can say that it has delivered, as we have heard, export controls, on sanctions, and not least also indirectly on the data flows. I would just highlight one of the comments made from my peers early on and refrain from repeating their previous comment. But cybersecurity and misinformation is reality, and something that is really close to people's heart at Europe at the moment. How do we collaborate better in sharing vulnerability to actually create a common governance model? Today, we don't have that, and it is something that is the future of security, and it is really close to people's heart. Well, then, if we look at two other things that are really close to people's heart, and would be the green transition and the security agenda. Unrest will come from environmental damage. Only in one day, in 2019, 12.5 billion tons of ice melted in Greenland and created 7 centimeters of water, enough to cover all of Germany. So the future of security policy is also environmental policy. And let me turn to being very specific on two things that we can actually do joint together. First, of course, the turning to renewable energy. If we look at what the attack by the Russians have done to the Nordic countries compared to the Eastern European country, this is a totally different situation. The Nordics more or less go free because we're based on renewable energy and technologies of the future, whereas I'm telling you, the Eastern European countries are not going to see the same stability as we are in the Nordic countries. Second, let me turn to an area where we can really move the needle. 40% of CO2 emissions comes from buildings. Europe is leading on technologies on how to bring down CO2 within buildings, how we actually construct them, how we maintain them, and how we actually tear them down. Let's put concrete targets on concrete sectors, and let's actually review the regulation that lead this. For example, the building directive.
Could you come to the question very fast? Thank you.
So maybe last but not least, let's look at how we can put common goals on communication. Undersecretary Fernandez, you asked, how can we reach the stakeholders? We have actually achieved 3 great things, but we have told very little about it. Use us, use your stakeholders. I have personally access to 40,000 small and medium-sized businesses. I am happy to tell this story, I do, but let's make common target here in this forum on how many did we reach and how did we tell the story. Thank you.
Elvire Fabry.
Good morning, thank you. I've got two questions, but they're very brief. First, I would like to go back on greening ICT. What concrete cooperation and coordination mechanism do the US and the EU intend to implement so that greening ICT is more than a slogan and that EU and US actions in this field become a global benchmark? The first question. And the second one has to see with green subsidies. There is obviously great potential for raised subsidy and trade tensions as each side intensifies its direct support programs for the green transition. So while clean energy and technology subsidies are being challenged by WTO subsidy rules, how can we ensure that the EU and the US use the TTC to initiate discussions on the adoption of common principles and disciplines for green subsidies and manage the trade challenges related to green subsidies in international fora?
Thank you very much. Jason Oxman from ITI.
Thank you very much. And my question is related to technology standards. As Vice President Dombrovskis noted, industry-driven technology standards are enormously important. And I want to ask a question about how we can work together on those technology standards. Mais d'abord, un petit mot en français pour remercier nos amis dans le gouvernement de la France et la présidence française pour nous avoir invités ici. The technology standards are actually very active within the EU. The EU itself supports ETSI and CEN and other related standards bodies. Secretary Raimondo's marvelous Commerce Department has within it NIST, more than 100-year-old organization that works on technology standards. So my question is, how can we work with the technology industry, which is very standards focused? ITI, in addition to being the technology industry's global trade association, is also an ANSI in the US and IEC in Europe, accredited standards body that works on technology standards. How can we move forward with the TTC in partnership with industry to help drive forward voluntary standards, particularly in the face of, shall we say, countries that don't necessarily share the values of the US and the EU, that may be pushing localization policies and country-specific technology standards that may not support European and US values? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you want, maybe one of you.
Well, actually, these are the discussions that we've had. So it's really difficult to summarize them because I think you capture it really well. We have signed today what we call they're already starting abbreviating it, the Strategic Standardization Information Mechanism. And the point of this is basically to have, the merger between a war room and a spreadsheet that tells us where to focus in order to do the standardization work together. But the first part of that is knowing where does it take place, who's entering, precisely who are the businesses, the people moving in to set these standards. And that goes for green technology standards, obviously, as well. On the point of green subsidies, we have touched upon green procurement, because that has to be done well. There's a lot of potential, but it cannot be seen as a new version of protectionism. Telling anyone else that only we in a very close circle can actually trade with one another because we're the only one to have these very high standards. It needs to be done in a way so that the procurement market is still open, so that green procurement is for real. And I think that's also a way of addressing the question of green subsidies. And last but not least, we have agreed on sort of principles to prevent subsidy races. That subsidies, they need to be only if necessary, proportionate also to the private investment, and appropriate. And if it turns out well, here we are focusing on semiconductors, I think, of course, this is something that we can discuss. Well, could it work also in other areas, in particular to create more transparency? So I think there is a lot of food for thought here. In particular, I think we should take it as a challenge, how to take greening ICT from a slogan to something in real life. Because there will be no fighting climate change without digitization. But then, of course, digitization will have to be so much more resource efficient than what we see today. And that is from the very first minerals are mined for the chips to the electricity that goes into driving our computers and our clouds and our server parks. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a fantastic summary. The only point I would add on to is, Cecilia, your comment about communication. And today we have begun that discussion. You know, TTC, although for some of us it feels like it's been around for a long time, we're 8 months old. This was our second meeting. But we had an extensive discussion this morning around how do we brand TTC? How do we communicate about TTC? And your point is an excellent one, which is how to use the stakeholders to broadcast the message as well as getting information from you. So rest assured, it's on the docket, and we'll be reaching out to each and every one of you to reach out to your networks to broadcast what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. We're concluding now, so we can have time for the presser. Any additional remarks from anyone? If not, thank you very much.
No, we need to say thank you again. We cannot end this without saying thank you once again, because everyone has come here. The working groups have delivered to enable this. We now have the work scoped for us until the next TTC. We're very much looking forward to the invitation. But I think we should really thank our French hosts for this organization.